Los Angeles, summer, 1972, a broken highway. A man stands alone on the shoulder of the Pacific Coast Highway, his hands shaking, his uniform faded and worn. He doesn't wave for help. He doesn't move. He just stands there, staring at nothing, like a ghost trapped between worlds. A black Lincoln Continental slows down, stops. The window rolls down, and one of the most recognizable faces in the world looks out at a man who doesn't recognize him, doesn't care who he is. Because when you've seen what this veteran has seen, Hollywood doesn't matter anymore. Fame doesn't matter. Nothing matters. What happens in the next 30 minutes will never make the papers. No cameras, no witnesses, just two men, one conversation, and a moment of grace that reveals more about Marlon Brando than any film ever could. Here is the story. America is tearing itself apart. The war in Vietnam is a wound that won't stop bleeding. Every night, the news shows body bags and protests. Every day, young men come home to a country that doesn't want them. They return as heroes and are treated like criminals, spat on, ignored, forgotten. Hollywood is changing too. The old guard is dying. The studio bosses who built empires are losing control. In their place, a new breed of filmmaker is emerging, raw, angry, dangerous. Francis Ford Coppola is about to release The Godfather, and sitting at the center of that revolution is Marlon Brando. But Brando in 1972 is not the same man who exploded onto screens in A Streetcar Named Desire 20 years earlier. That young god with the perfect body and the method acting that changed everything, he's gone, replaced by something heavier, darker, more complicated. The public sees a recluse, a difficult actor who turned his back on Hollywood, who refused roles, who gained weight and stopped caring about his appearance, who rejected his first Oscar and humiliated the Academy. The gossip columns paint him as ungrateful, arrogant, finished. But here's what nobody knew. Behind the weight and the anger and the rejection of fame was a man being crushed by the hypocrisy of America. A man who couldn't reconcile the country's mythology with its reality, who saw indigenous people slaughtered and lied about, who watched Black Americans fight for basic dignity while Hollywood congratulated itself for doing the bare minimum, who saw young men shipped to Southeast Asia to die in a war built on lies. Brando wasn't running from Hollywood. He was running from the lie of it all. The pretending, the performance, the game where everyone smiled and shook hands while the world burned. And on this day, driving up the Pacific Coast Highway after a meeting he didn't want to take, he sees a man on the side of the road. Young, maybe 25, wearing pieces of a military uniform, standing completely still, not hitchhiking, not asking for help, just standing there. Most people would drive past. It's Los Angeles. Everyone's got problems. Everyone's got somewhere to be. But something stops Brando. Something in the way the young man stands, the way he doesn't move, the way he looks like he's already dead. Within minutes, a conversation will begin that changes both men, a moment of recognition that has nothing to do with fame and everything to do with what it means to be human when your country has broken you. Nobody documented this. Nobody wrote about it. For decades, only a handful of people knew it happened. And if not for a chance encounter years later, this story would have died with both men. To understand why Brando stopped that day, you need to know what was eating him alive in 1972. The Godfather had just been released. It was a phenomenon. Lines around the block. Critics calling it a masterpiece. Brando's performance as Don Vito Corleone was being hailed as a comeback, a resurrection, proof that the greatest actor of his generation still had it. But Brando didn't care. He took the role for the money. He needed it. His finances were a disaster. His personal life was a catastrophe. His marriages had failed. His children were struggling. He owned a private island in Tahiti that was draining him dry. He was overweight, exhausted, and disgusted with himself. And more than anything, he was disgusted with America. Just weeks before this encounter on the highway, Brando had sent a young Apache woman named Sacheen Littlefeather to reject his Oscar on live television, to stand in front of Hollywood's elite and tell them that he couldn't accept an award from an industry that had spent decades dehumanizing Native Americans, that as long as Wounded Knee was under siege, as long as indigenous people were being brutalized and erased, he couldn't pretend to celebrate. The reaction was vicious. John Wayne tried to physically attack Littlefeather. The audience booed. The press called Brando ungrateful, unpatriotic, insane. Even people who agreed with his politics thought he'd gone too far. You don't embarrass the Academy. You don't reject the Oscar. You don't make Hollywood look at itself. But Brando didn't care about the rules anymore. He'd spent years watching America celebrate itself while destroying everything it claimed to stand for, and he couldn't stay silent anymore. So when he saw that young veteran standing on the side of the road, he wasn't just seeing a stranger in need. He was seeing America's hypocrisy made flesh. A young man sent to fight a war built on lies, then brought home and discarded like garbage. Brando pulled over, got out of the car, and walked toward the man. The veteran didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge him, just kept staring at the ocean. "You need help?" Brando asked. No response. "Your car break down?" Still nothing. The young man's jaw was clenched. His hands were shaking. Not from cold, from something else. Something deeper. Brando stood there for a moment. He'd been famous. For 20 years. He was used to people recognizing him, staring, asking for autographs, telling him how much they loved him in this movie or that. But this man didn't recognize him, didn't care. And something about that was a relief. Quick question. Have you ever had a secret that was eating you alive? A burden you carried alone because showing it would destroy everything? A pain so deep that you couldn't even name it without falling apart? Let us know in the comments. Because that's what Brando saw in this young man. The same thing he saw in himself. A person drowning in a country that demanded you smile while it killed you. "I'm not going to hurt you," Brando said quietly, "but I'm not leaving until I know you're okay." The veteran finally looked at him. His eyes were empty, not angry, not sad, just empty. "You can't help me," the man said. "Maybe not," Brando replied, "but I can listen." And that's when it started, the conversation that nobody recorded, the moment that revealed who Marlon Brando really was when the cameras weren't rolling. But to understand what happened next, you need to know what this veteran had just come home from. The hell that was waiting in his eyes. They sat on the guardrail. Two men, strangers. The ocean crashing below them. The traffic rushing past. And slowly, carefully, the young veteran started to talk. His name was Michael. 24 years old? 2 tours in Vietnam, honorable discharge, home for 3 weeks. He'd been driving up the coast to see his parents, to surprise them. But somewhere between Los Angeles and Ventura, he had to pull over. Couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Just sat in his car until it overheated. Then stood on the side of the road, frozen. "I can't go home," he said. "I can't look at them. They'll ask me questions. They'll want to know what it was like. And I can't tell them. I can't say it out loud." Brando didn't push. He just listened. The way he listened to directors when he was young. The way he listened to the indigenous activists who taught him about the reality of America. Present, patient, real. Michael kept talking about the things he'd seen. The villages, the children, the orders that didn't make sense, the brothers he lost, the guilt that was crushing him. Everyone here is pretending it's not happening. Michael said. They see me in uniform and they look away. Like I'm a disease. Like I did something wrong. But I was just doing what they told me to do. I believed them. I believed we were the good guys. His voice cracked, but he didn't cry. Men like Michael had learned not to cry, had learned to bury everything so deep that it turned into stone. And now I'm home, he continued, and I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know what I did it for. I don't know if any of it meant anything. But to understand what happened in that moment, you need to know who. Marlon Brando was in 1972. This wasn't an actor playing a role. This was a man who'd spent the last 5 years trying to wake America up, who'd marched with the Black Panthers, who'd stood with indigenous activists at Alcatraz, who'd used his fame and his money to support causes that made him a target. Brando understood what it meant to believe in something, then discover it was a lie. He'd believed in America once, believed in the dream, believed that talent and truth could change things. But Hollywood had taught him otherwise. It taught him that the industry that claimed to celebrate art was really just a machine for selling fantasies, for keeping people asleep. And Vietnam was the same thing. A fantasy sold to young men like Michael. The idea that they were heroes, that they were protecting freedom, that America was always the good guy. Brando had watched young men like Michael get chewed up by that lie. And he'd watched America refuse to take responsibility, refuse to admit what it had done. So when Michael said he didn't know who he was anymore, Brando understood. Because Brando didn't know who he was anymore either. I don't know your name, Michael said suddenly, looking at Brando for the first time. Really looking. Should I? Brando almost smiled. Doesn't matter. You an actor or something? Yeah, or something. Michael nodded, looked back at the ocean. You ever feel like you're pretending to be a person? Like you're just going through the motions, but there's nothing inside anymore? Every single day, Brando said. And that's when the walls came down. When Michael started talking about the real stuff, the nightmares, the sounds he couldn't unhear, the faces he couldn't forget, the moment he realized that everything he'd been told was a lie, that the war wasn't about freedom or democracy, it was about power and money and old men sending young men to die. I watched my best friend burn alive, Michael said, his voice flat. Dead. We couldn't get to him. He was screaming. And when it was over, they told us it was friendly fire, our own artillery. And you know what we did? We packed up his body and moved on. Because that's what you do. You move on. This is the part that was kept secret for decades. The part that shows who Marlon Brando really was. Most celebrities would have offered empty comfort, would have said something about healing or therapy or time, would have made it about themselves, would have told a story about how they overcame something. Brando didn't do any of that. Instead, he said, "You're not crazy. You're not broken. You're awake. And that's the hardest thing in the world." Michael looked at him, confused. This country wants you to come home and pretend it didn't happen, Brando continued. It wants you to stuff it down and move on and be grateful. But you can't, because you saw the truth. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. So what do? Michael asked. And for the first time, there was something in his voice, not hope, but something close to it, a lifeline. Brando was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that Michael would remember for the rest of his life. You survive. You find other people who understand. You tell the truth. Even when nobody wants to hear it, you don't let them make you forget. And you don't let the guilt destroy you. Because the guilt belongs to the people who sent you there, not to you. They sat there for another hour, maybe longer. Time stopped meaning anything. Brando didn't offer Michael money, didn't offer to fix his car or call anyone. He just sat with him, in the mess, in the truth, in the unbearable weight of being awake in a country that demands you stay asleep. And slowly, Michael started to breathe again, started to come back, not healed, not fixed, but alive. When they finally stood up, Michael looked at Brando and said, "I still don't know who you are." Brando laughed, a real laugh. "Good. Keep it that way." But then Michael's eyes widened. Recognition. "Wait, are you Marlon Brando?" "Doesn't matter." "Holy hell, you're Marlon Brando." Brando shook his head. "No. Right now I'm just a guy who stopped. That's it." They shook hands, and then Brando did something that Michael never forgot. He pulled him into a hug. A real one. Not the Hollywood fake embrace, a genuine human hug. "You're going to be okay," Brando said. "Not today, maybe not for a long time, but you will." Michael nodded. His eyes were wet now, but he didn't look away. Brando got back in his car, drove away. And as far as anyone knows, they never saw each other again. Michael did survive. He went home that day, had the conversation with his parents, started therapy, found a veterans group. It took years, decades, but he built a life, not the life he thought he'd have, but a life. And he never told anyone about Marlon Brando, not because Brando asked him to keep it secret, but because it felt sacred, private, a moment that belonged to them alone. But here's the part that nobody knew. Michael wasn't the only veteran Brando stopped for. Over the years, quietly, without press or publicity, Brando developed a habit. When he saw someone who looked lost, broken, or forgotten, he stopped. He didn't always know what to say. He wasn't a therapist. He wasn't a saint. But he showed up. He listened. And sometimes that was enough. Brando never talked about it. Never used it for good publicity. Never let his publicist spin it into a story about what a great humanitarian he was. Because for Brando, this wasn't about his image. It was about staying human in an industry and a country that demanded you become a monster or a machine. The truth about Michael's story only came out decades later. Michael was being interviewed for a documentary about Vietnam veterans, about coming home, about the silence and the shame. And at the end of the interview, off camera, he mentioned it, almost as an afterthought. "Once, Marlon Brando stopped his car to talk to me," he said. "Saved my life. But I never told anyone because it felt like it would cheapen it." The filmmaker asked him to elaborate, and Michael told the story. All of it. Was it coincidence that Brando stopped that day? Or was it something deeper? A man who'd spent his life pretending to be other people, desperate to do one real thing. Let us know what you think, because this story reveals something about Brando that the films never could. Yes, he was difficult. Yes, he was angry. Yes, he rejected Hollywood and embarrassed the establishment. But underneath all of that was a man who understood pain, who saw through the lies, and who tried, in his own flawed way, to ease the suffering of people nobody else would stop for. Fast forward to 2004. Brando is dead. The obituaries talk about his genius, his difficult reputation, his weight, his failures. They mention the Godfather and a streetcar named Desire. They debate whether he wasted his talent, but they don't mention Michael. They don't mention the other veterans. They don't mention the quiet acts of grace that nobody photographed. Because in Hollywood, only the performance matters. Only what's captured on film. Only what can be sold. But the truth? The truth is that Marlon Brando's greatest performances happened off camera, in moments nobody recorded, with people nobody cared about. And that's the legacy the industry wants you to forget. Marlon Brando was not a perfect man. He was cruel sometimes, selfish, self-destructive. He hurt people who loved him. He abandoned projects. He let his demons win more often than he should have. But he was also capable of extraordinary empathy, of seeing people that society made invisible, of stopping his car on a random highway to sit with a young man who was drowning, not because it would make him look good, but because it was the right thing to do. That's the Marlon Brando that history is forgetting. The one who rejected the Oscar because he couldn't celebrate while indigenous people were being slaughtered. The one who used his fame to amplify voices that Hollywood wanted to silence. The one who stopped for veterans that America wanted to forget. Michael lived into his 70s, built a family, became an advocate for other veterans. And he said that the moment Brando stopped, the moment someone saw him and didn't look away, was the moment he decided to keep living. One conversation, one act of presence, one moment of refusing to drive past someone in pain. That's what saved a life. Not a grand gesture, not a donation, not a speech, just stopping. So here's the question for you. Have you ever had a moment where someone's simple act of kindness changed everything? Where someone stopped when everyone else kept driving? And if you could stop for one person today, who would it be? Let us know in the comments. Which untold story should we cover next? The secret meeting between James Dean and Marlon Brando that changed both their lives? Or the hidden truth about what really happened to Montgomery Clift after his accident? And unfortunately, they don't make men like Marlon Brando anymore.